I believe we exist in a multiverse of universes. These words from theoretical physicist Michio Kaku represent a fundamental fracture in how we understand the architecture of reality. For decades, humanity has measured the observable limit of our existence. The cosmic microwave background radiation sets a rigid thermal boundary, exactly 46.5 billion light-years away in every direction. We map the remnants of early expansion and inherently assume this spherical cage of microwave data is the entirety of all that is. Yet the underlying geometry of space indicates absolute flatness. A flat geometry in cosmological terms implies infinite extension. It cannot logically terminate at the exact point where our instruments stop gathering data. The boundary we perceive is an illusion constructed by the speed of light. It is merely the maximum distance photons have travelled since the rapid expansion began. What exists beyond that thermal wall is the central obsession of modern theoretical physics. When we examine the fundamental forces governing our local reality, we encounter a disturbing precision. We measure gravity, the electromagnetic force, and the strong and weak nuclear forces. We find them calibrated to a degree of exactness that defies statistical probability. If the strong nuclear force were a fraction of a percent stronger, the universe would be entirely composed of helium. Chemistry would be non-existent. If gravity were slightly weaker, matter would never have coalesced into structures. We exist in a precise corridor of mathematical parameters. Physicists refer to this as the fine-tuning problem. It forces us into an uncomfortable intellectual position. We must either accept that our existence is the result of an anomalous, inexplicable miracle, or we must consider the mathematical alternative. The alternative is that our reality is not singular. It is simply one permutation among an infinite array of variations. To understand this necessity, we must trace the expansion of reality backward in time, compressing 14 billion years of history into a single point of infinite density. We label this the singularity and the subsequent expansion the Big Bang. But the standard model of the Big Bang contains a critical omission. It perfectly describes the cooling and expansion of matter after the event, but it offers absolutely no mechanism for the event itself. It does not explain what detonated the singularity. The equations of general relativity completely fail at the origin point. They break down into mathematical nonsense. In the late 20th century, the concept of cosmic inflation was introduced to solve the thermal uniformity of the observable universe. The theory proposed that in the earliest fraction of a second, the universe underwent a violent exponential expansion, stretching quantum fluctuations into macroscopic scale. But the mathematics of inflation carry a hidden mechanism. Once inflation begins, it does not stop everywhere simultaneously. The expansion is driven by a repulsive energy field. While this field may decay in certain localized regions, causing inflation to halt, and a stable universe to form the surrounding energy field, continues to expand exponentially. This is the framework of eternal inflation. It completely dismantles the idea of a solitary existence. It dictates that the repulsive energy field is continuously generating new realities. Each time the field decays in a specific region, a new universe crystallizes out of the expanding void. Our universe, the entire expanse of billions of galaxies we observe, is merely one of these localized pockets. We are suspended in a boiling ocean of eternal expansion where new physical realities are being born continuously. The mathematical models suggest that these bubble universes do not share the same physical laws. The process of crystallization from the inflationary field is an inherently random quantum event. When a new pocket forms, the fundamental constants freeze into place like ice crystals. The mass of the electron, the speed of light, the strength of gravity. These values are not universally mandated. They are local environmental conditions. In a neighboring reality, gravity might act as a repulsive force. Light might carry heavy mass. Biology as we understand it would be mathematically impossible. This entirely resolves the fine-tuning paradox. Our universe is not perfectly calibrated for life by design. We simply find ourselves in the specific bubble where the local parameters allow for the formation of complex molecules. In the infinite expanse of the multiverse, every conceivable variation of physical laws must exist. If these realities are constantly forming within the same expanding substrate, the immediate question is whether they ever interact. The inflationary field expands faster than the speed of light driving the bubbles apart. However, statistical probability dictates that occasionally two bubbles will form in close proximity before the space between them has time to stretch. They would collide, a hypervelocity impact between two realities each operating under its own set of physics. If our universe experienced such an event in its infancy, the impact would have left a permanent structural scar. Researchers are currently analysing the cosmic microwave background, searching for spherical temperature anomalies that could serve as evidence. The confirmation of such an anomaly would mean the multiverse is no longer a theoretical construct. It would be an observable fact. The exploration of the multiverse does not rely solely on the macroscopic expansion of cosmological models. The most rigorous evidence for branching realities exists at the subatomic level, within the fundamental structure of matter itself. When physicists transition from the immense scale of cosmic inflation to the microscopic domain of quantum mechanics, the classical laws of physics dissolve into a landscape of probability. The foundational experiment demonstrating this collapse of certainty is the double-slit experiment. When individual particles such as electrons or photons are fired through a barrier containing two parallel slits, they do not behave as solid projectiles. Instead, they produce an interference pattern on the detector screen. This pattern mathematically proves that a single particle passes through both slits simultaneously, interacting with itself as a wave of probability. However, the mere act of placing a measurement device at the slits to observe which path the particle takes forces the wave function to collapse. The particle suddenly behaves as a discrete object passing through only one slit. Reality alters its fundamental behavior based strictly on the presence of measurement. This observer effect created a profound crisis in 20th century physics. The prevailing explanation became known as the Copenhagen interpretation, which argued that a particle exists in a state of quantum superposition, holding all possible states simultaneously until it is observed. At the moment of observation, the superposition collapses and reality randomly selects one outcome. But this interpretation introduces a severe logical inconsistency. It suggests that consciousness or macroscopic measurement apparatus possesses a mystical ability to dictate reality. To expose this absurdity, Erwin Schrödinger proposed his famous thought experiment. He placed a hypothetical cat in a sealed steel chamber, alongside a radioactive atom, a Geiger counter, and a vial of hydrocyanic acid. The atom exists in a quantum state with a precisely equal probability of decaying or not decaying within a given hour. If it decays, the counter triggers a hammer that shatters the vial and the cat dies. If it does not decay, the cat lives. According to the Copenhagen interpretation, before the box is opened, the atom is both decayed and undecayed simultaneously. Therefore, the macroscopic system becomes entangled with the quantum state. The cat must be considered simultaneously dead and alive in a state of macroscopic superposition. Schrödinger intended this as a devastating critique, demonstrating that the Copenhagen interpretation leads to a logical failure when applied to macroscopic objects. Yet the mathematics remained irrefutable. The quantum state does exist. To resolve this paradox without relying on the mystical collapse of the wave function, a physicist named Hugh Everett III proposed a radical alternative in 1957. He formulated the relative state formulation, which later became known as the many worlds interpretation. Everett argued that the wave function never collapses. The mathematics are entirely literal. When a quantum system exists in a state of superposition, all possible outcomes are physically realized. However, they are not realized in the same reality. At the exact moment of the quantum event, the universe undergoes a process of decoherence. It splits into distinct non-communicating branches, Decoherence is the mechanism by which quantum interference is suppressed, allowing classical reality to emerge from the quantum substrate. It is not a physical separation of space, but an informational separation. The branches occupy the same physical space but remain mathematically orthogonal, unable to interact or communicate. The illusion of a singular timeline is merely a cognitive limitation. Human neurology evolved to process a single continuous narrative, rendering us completely blind to the infinite divergence of states occurring around us. In the context of the steel chamber, the opening of the box does not force the universe to choose between a living or dead animal. Instead, the act of observation causes the observer to become entangled with the system. The reality fractures. In one universe, the observer opens the box and finds a living cat. In a newly created orthogonal universe, an identical version of the observer opens the box and finds a dead cat. Both realities are equally valid. Both observers possess the same memories up to the point of divergence, and both perceive themselves as existing in the sole absolute reality. The implications of Everettian quantum mechanics extend far beyond laboratory experiments. The universe is constructed of quantum particles. Every thermodynamic fluctuation, every synaptic misfire in a human brain, every chaotic interaction of molecules represents a quantum event that triggers decoherence. Reality is continuously fracturing into an incomprehensible infinity of branching paths, creating a multiverse of phase space where every physically possible history is enacted. If the many worlds interpretation represents the true architecture of existence, it forces a disturbing re-evaluation of mortality and consciousness. This leads to a philosophical derivative known as quantum immortality. Consider an extreme variation of the previous experiment, replacing the animal with a human observer, acting as the trigger mechanism. In this scenario, a quantum device measures the spin of an electron. If the spin is up, the device remains inactive. If the spin is down, the device immediately terminates the observer with zero latency, preventing any perception of death. According to Everett, every activation of the device splits the universe. In 50% of the resulting branches, the observer is terminated. In the remaining 50%, the observer survives. From the perspective of an external witness observing the experiment run sequentially 10 times, the probability of the subject surviving all 10 trials is less than 1/10 of 1%. The external witness will almost certainly observe the termination of the subject. However, from the subjective viewpoint of the conscious observer, the experience is fundamentally different. Consciousness can only perceive a universe in which it continues to exist. It cannot experience non-existence. Therefore, as the multiverse fractures the observer, subjective awareness is continuously isolated into the specific branches where the termination device failed to activate or the quantum outcome favored survival. Even if the experiment is run 1,000 times yielding a survival probability approaching absolute zero, there will always be at least one mathematical branch where the observer remains alive. In that specific timeline, the observer will perceive themselves as possessing an inexplicable, impossible streak of luck. They will continue to experience reality indefinitely, effectively becoming immortal within their own subjective frame of reference, while leaving behind countless parallel timelines populated by grieving external observers. This extreme application of quantum mechanics illustrates how the mathematical framework of the multiverse dismantles our classical understanding of life-death and the continuity of the self. The pursuit of a unified understanding of reality faces an insurmountable barrier. General relativity perfectly describes the macroscopic universe of gravity and planetary motion. Quantum mechanics perfectly describes the microscopic universe of subatomic interaction. Yet when physicists attempt to combine these two frameworks, the mathematics yield infinite probabilities and nonsensical results. The equations literally self-destruct. This fundamental incompatibility implies that our understanding of the universe is not merely incomplete, but structurally flawed. To resolve this conflict, theoretical physics introduced a concept that requires a complete abandonment of traditional spatial perception. This is string theory. String theory dictates that the fundamental constituents of reality are not point-like particles. Electrons and quarks do not exist as zero-dimensional dots. If we could examine them at a magnification millions of times greater than our current capability, we would see microscopic vibrating filaments of energy. These one-dimensional strings possess a singular defining characteristic, which is their resonant frequency. Just as different vibrations on a cello string produce different musical notes, different vibrational patterns of these fundamental energy strings produce different subatomic particles. A string vibrating at one frequency manifests as an electron. A string vibrating at another frequency manifests as a photon or a graviton. Matter energy and the fundamental forces are nothing more than a cosmic symphony played on identical vibrating filaments. But the mathematics of string theory demand a severe compromise. The equations simply do not function in a universe with 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. For the mathematical framework to remain consistent, it requires a reality constructed of 10 or 11 spatial dimensions. Because human perception is strictly confined to 3 dimensions, physicists propose that the remaining dimensions are compactified. They are curled up into microscopic topological spaces so infinitesimally small that they remain permanently undetected by our senses and our instruments. In the mid-1990s, a theoretical breakthrough known as M-theory unified various competing string theories by introducing an 11th dimension. This conceptual leap transformed the vibrating strings into 2-dimensional membranes and eventually into multi-dimensional objects known as brains. According to M-theory, our entire observable universe is not a 3-dimensional volume of empty space. It is a 3-dimensional brain. We are trapped on the surface of this membrane floating within a higher dimensional void known as the bulk. We cannot perceive the bulk just as a 2-dimensional organism living on a sheet of paper cannot perceive the 3-dimensional room around it. This multi-dimensional framework provides a terrifyingly elegant explanation for the origin of the Big Bang. The ekpyrotic model suggests that our universe is not alone in the bulk. There are other 3-dimensional brains floating parallel to ours. These massive geometric structures are slowly drawn together by gravitational forces leaking across the higher dimensions. Over trillions of years they accelerate toward each other. When 2 brains collide, the kinetic energy of the impact is entirely converted into matter and radiation. To the inhabitants of the brain, this cataclysmic collision appears exactly like a sudden spontaneous explosion of infinite heat and density. It appears as a Big Bang. In this model, the universe does not begin from a singular point of nothingness. It is caught in an infinite cycle of collisions, expansions, cooling, and subsequent collisions. Reality is a perpetual motion machine fueled by the violent impact of parallel universes. However, the ultimate progression of multiverse theory discards physical membranes and quantum fluctuations entirely. Theoretical physicist Max Tegmark proposes the Level 4 multiverse, which argues that the fundamental nature of reality is not physical at all. It is purely mathematical. In standard physics, we use mathematics to describe the universe. Tegmark argues that this perspective is inverted. The universe is not described by mathematics. The universe is mathematics. Any mathematical structure that can be defined without contradiction must possess a physical existence. We experience our reality as physical only because we are self-aware mathematical substructures operating within it. If this postulate is true, the multiverse is absolutely infinite, encompassing every conceivable variation of a logic, geometry, and physical law. If existence is an infinite fractal of branching realities, bubble universes, and mathematical constructs, we are forced to confront the ultimate existential paradox. If every possible outcome occurs across the multiverse, then human choice appears mathematically irrelevant. There is a universe where you are a monarch, and a universe where you ceased to exist a decade ago. Yet this infinite multiplicity does not negate the value of the singular timeline. Human consciousness functions as a focal point. You are the specific observer locked into this specific trajectory. The weight of existence does not lie in the infinite possibilities that occur elsewhere. It lies in the singular collapsing wave function of your immediate present. The reality you perceive is the only one you can ever inhabit, making this exact configuration of atoms and choices infinitely precious. We have navigated the absolute limits of physical reality and mathematical infinity. The multiverse shatters the illusion of our cosmic significance, yet elevates the profound improbability of our existence. But while we look outward at infinite parallel dimensions, a much darker paradox exists right here in the center of our own galaxy. There are gravitational singularities tearing the fabric of space-time apart, permanently erasing information from the universe and threatening the foundation of quantum physics. We have navigated the absolute limits of physical reality and mathematical infinity. The multiverse shatters the illusion of our cosmic significance, yet elevates the profound improbability of our existence. But while we look outward at infinite parallel dimensions, a much darker paradox exists right here in the center of our own galaxy. There are gravitational singularities tearing the fabric of space-time apart, permanently erasing information from the universe and threatening the foundation of quantum physics. For decades, we believed these cosmic titans were simply the ultimate end, a silent graveyard for dying stars. But what if they are not just destroying matter? What if they are systematically deleting the very memory of the universe itself? If you throw a book into a blazing fire, its information survives in the smoke and ash, waiting to be mathematically decoded. But if you throw that same book into a black hole, the universe forgets it ever existed. This is the black hole information paradox, an intellectual nightmare that pits Albert Einstein against quantum mechanics in a war for the survival of reality. I thought the singularity was simply a cosmic garbage disposal where matter was crushed into nothingness. But the terrifying truth currently hiding on the two-dimensional surface of that pitch-black trap will change how you perceive your own body, your reality, and your entire existence forever. We have navigated the absolute limits of physical reality and mathematical infinity. The multiverse shatters the illusion of our cosmic significance, yet elevates the profound improbability of our existence. But while we look outward at infinite parallel dimensions, a much darker paradox exists right here in the center of our own galaxy. There are gravitational singularities tearing the fabric of space-time apart, permanently erasing information from the universe and threatening the foundation of quantum physics. For decades, we believed these cosmic titans were simply the ultimate end, a silent graveyard for dying stars. But what if they are not just destroying matter? What if they are systematically deleting the very memory of the universe itself? If you throw a book into a blazing fire, its information survives in the smoke and ash, waiting to be mathematically decoded. But if you throw that same book into a black hole, the universe forgets it ever existed. This is the black hole information paradox, an intellectual nightmare that pits Albert Einstein against quantum mechanics in a war for the survival of reality. I thought the singularity was simply a cosmic garbage disposal where matter was crushed into nothingness. But the terrifying truth currently hiding on the two-dimensional surface of that pitch-black trap will change how you perceive your own body, your reality, and your entire existence forever. We always assume that falling into a black hole is a violent, catastrophic death. But the most terrifying aspect is that you would never even realize you had crossed the point of no return. Imagine an astronaut drifting towards Sagittarius, a star, the supermassive black hole anchoring the Milky Way galaxy. From their perspective, the journey is eerily peaceful. As they cross the event horizon, the invisible boundary where the escape velocity exceeds the speed of light, they feel absolutely nothing unusual. According to general relativity, space-time is simply curving. They are in free fall, moving along a natural geometric path. They can still see the universe behind them distorted into a blinding halo of starlight. They can still look at their hands and observe their own continuous existence. The local laws of physics remain entirely intact for the falling observer. But for an observer watching safely from a distance, the reality of the astronaut fractures into a grotesque illusion. As the falling astronaut approaches the event horizon, the external observer sees their movement slow down exponentially. The immense gravity stretches the wavelength of the light reflecting off the astronaut, shifting them into the red spectrum. To the outside universe, the astronaut never actually crosses the horizon. Their image becomes frozen, stretching and fading into the infrared until they simply vanish, painted onto the surface of the black hole like a ghost. Two completely contradictory realities exist simultaneously. The astronaut experiences a swift descent toward the singularity, while the external universe records them freezing forever on the boundary. This is not a trick of the light. This is a fundamental breakdown of space and time. But the true crisis begins deep within the darkness. Once the event horizon is breached, all paths through space-time point exclusively inward. Time and space literally swap roles. Just as you cannot stop yourself from moving forward in time toward tomorrow, the astronaut cannot stop themselves from moving toward the center. The singularity is no longer a place in space. It is an unavoidable event in their future. At this core, gravity becomes infinite. The mathematical equations that describe our universe shatter. Matter is compressed to infinite density and zero volume. Every atom, every quantum state, every piece of data that made up the astronaut is crushed out of physical reality. According to classical physics, the information is safely locked away forever behind the event horizon. It is inaccessible, but it is not destroyed. The universe still balances its equations. Stephen Hawking solved a magnificent mystery, but in doing so he inadvertently ignited a bomb that threatens to destroy all of modern physics. In 1974, Hawking applied quantum mechanics to the absolute edge of the event horizon. In the vacuum of space, quantum fluctuations constantly create pairs of virtual particles. A particle and an antiparticle pop into existence, borrow energy from the void, and immediately annihilate each other. This happens everywhere all the time. But when this occurs exactly on the razor-thin boundary of a black hole, something impossible happens. One particle is captured by the immense gravity and falls in, while the other is left stranded outside. The escaping particle becomes real radiation. It steals a microscopic fraction of the black hole mass to do so. This is Hawking radiation. It means black holes are not truly black. They are faintly glowing. And more importantly, they are slowly evaporating. Over unimaginable trillions of years, the black hole will shrink away, losing mass particle by particle, until it eventually explodes in a blinding flash of energy, leaving absolutely nothing behind. And this is the catalyst for the greatest crisis in scientific history. If the black hole completely vanishes, what happens to the information of the astronaut? What happens to the billions of stars, planets, and civilizations that were swallowed over eons? The radiation leaking out of the black hole is completely random. It contains zero structural information about what fell inside. It is thermal noise. When the black hole evaporates, the information it consumed is not released back into the cosmos. It is mathematically erased. The universe forgets. But quantum mechanics is built upon a single unbreakable commandment. Information can never be destroyed. If you know the exact quantum state of the universe right now, you can calculate its exact state in the past and its exact state in the future. If black holes permanently delete information, the chain of causality is broken. Our ability to predict anything or understand our own past dissolves into meaningless chaos. Either Stephen Hawking is wrong about radiation or quantum mechanics is completely false. For over 2 decades, a fierce intellectual war raged across the landscape of theoretical physics. On one side stood Stephen Hawking, maintaining his stance that the singularity fundamentally destroys information. On the other side stood physicists like Leonard Susskind and Gerard T. Hooft, who realized that if Hawking was right, the entire foundation of human science would collapse. If causality can be erased in a black hole, it can be erased anywhere. The universe would be governed by random, unpredictable magic rather than mathematical law. They knew information had to survive, but the mechanism of its survival remained entirely elusive. To find the answer, they had to look away from the crushing depths of the singularity and focus entirely on the silent, invisible edge, the event horizon. If the three-dimensional information of a collapsed star can be perfectly stored on a flat two-dimensional surface, then what proves our entire universe is not simply a massive flat projection. This unsettling thought process began with the study of entropy. In the 1970s, physicist Jacob Bekenstein proposed a radical idea. He suggested that black holes must have entropy, which is a measure of hidden information or disorder. But Bekenstein noticed a mathematical anomaly. In our everyday experience, if you want to pack more information or more entropy into a space, you increase its volume. A larger box holds more files, but the mathematics of a black hole defied this logic. The amount of information a black hole can hold is not determined by its three-dimensional volume. It is entirely determined by the two-dimensional surface area of its event horizon. This means that every single piece of information, every atom of the astronaut, every photon from the dying star, every secret of the galaxy it consumed, is not lost to the infinite density of the singularity. Instead, as matter crosses the threshold, its quantum data is systematically peeled away and encoded onto the surface of the event horizon. Imagine a three-dimensional object passing through a scanner. The physical structure is obliterated, but a perfect two-dimensional barcode is printed on the edge of the abyss. This barcode contains the exact mathematical blueprint of the object. When the black hole slowly evaporates over trillions of years emitting Hawking radiation, this radiation is not just random thermal noise. As it passes through the event horizon, it interacts with the two-dimensional quantum barcode. The escaping radiation carries the information back out into the cosmos. It is highly scrambled, unreadable to our current technology, but fundamentally the information is never destroyed. The universe remembers. This elegant solution saved quantum mechanics, but the implications of this victory unleashed a philosophical monster. The principle that solved the black hole information paradox is now known as the holographic principle. Susskind and T. Hooft realized that if a black hole can store three-dimensional reality on a two-dimensional surface, this mathematical framework might not be limited to black holes. A black hole is simply a region of space where gravity is stretched to its absolute limit. But the mathematics suggest that the maximum amount of information that can be contained in any volume of space anywhere in the universe is always proportional to the surface area enclosing that space. Think about the room you are currently sitting in. You perceive it as a three-dimensional volume filled with objects, air molecules, and yourself. But the holographic principle states that the absolute total of all the quantum information in your room can be perfectly represented by a two-dimensional boundary surrounding it. Every thought in your brain, every cell in your body, every physical interaction occurring in your three-dimensional reality is mathematically equivalent to a highly complex set of quantum fluctuations happening on a flat two-dimensional surface far away. Just as a security hologram on a credit card contains all the visual data needed to project a three-dimensional image, your entire existence might be a holographic projection generated by a two-dimensional shell at the cosmological boundary of our universe. In 1997, theoretical physicist Juan Maldacena provided the mathematical proof that made this terrifying concept impossible to ignore. He developed a framework known as the anti-de Sitter conformal field theory correspondence. Maldacena mathematically proved that a universe with gravity in three spatial dimensions is exactly equivalent to a quantum boundary with no gravity and only two spatial dimensions. The two descriptions are dualities. They are two different mathematical languages describing the exact same underlying reality. When physicists run into unsolvable equations involving gravity in our three-dimensional universe, they can translate the problem to the two-dimensional boundary without gravity, solve it there, and translate the answer back. The mathematics work flawlessly. The implications of Maldaceno's mathematics are profoundly unsettling. If the anti-de Sitter conformal field theory correspondence applies to our universe, it means that the three-dimensional reality we perceive is an emergent property. It is not fundamental, just as temperature is not a fundamental property, but rather the emergent result of millions of atoms vibrating space and time themselves are merely the macroscopic illusion created by entangled quantum information on a distant two-dimensional surface. To comprehend this, we must zoom in to the absolute limit of physical measurement, the Planck length. At 10 to the power of negative 35 meters, the smooth, continuous fabric of space begins to break down. It becomes pixelated. The event horizon of a black hole is not a smooth, continuous sphere. It is a mosaic of these Planck-sized pixels. Each tiny square holds exactly one bit of quantum information, a 0 or a 1. When you look at your own hands, you're perceiving a three-dimensional volume of flesh, blood, and bone. You feel mass. You experience the passage of time. But the holographic principle dictates that the true fundamental description of your body exists as a complex matrix of two-dimensional quantum data, located on the cosmological boundary of the universe. The three-dimensional volume you occupy is simply a holographic projection, generated by the quantum entanglement of those distant flat pixels. You're quite literally a mathematical manifestation of surface area. This completely resolves the black hole information paradox. When the astronaut fell into the black hole, his three-dimensional projection was destroyed by the infinite gravity of the singularity, but his fundamental two-dimensional data remained perfectly intact and preserved on the event horizon. The universe never lost him. It simply reformatted his geometry. But this victory for quantum mechanics comes at a terrifying philosophical cost. It shatters our intuitive understanding of existence. If the vast emptiness of the cosmos, the billions of swirling galaxies, the intense heat of supernovae, and the intricate neural networks in your brain are all just a grand illusion projected from a flat boundary, it forces us to ask the ultimate question. If the universe is a hologram, where is the projector? If our reality is nothing more than a highly advanced quantum projection, encoded on a two-dimensional surface, what or who established the boundary conditions? Is the cosmos a naturally occurring mathematical structure as Max Tegmark suggests? Or is there a directed mechanism behind the projection? We have peered into the darkest abyss of the galaxy and discovered that the monster hiding in the center is not a destroyer of information. It is a master archivist. Black holes are the supreme hard drives of the cosmos, preserving the memory of everything that has ever existed on their two-dimensional screens. They have revealed the fundamental illusion of depth, the deception of volume, and the fragile nature of what we call reality. You're not a physical being moving through a three-dimensional universe. You're a localized cluster of quantum information, experiencing the brilliant hallucination of space and time. If our entire physical existence is merely a holographic projection, mathematically identical to a simulation running on a two-dimensional surface, then the line between natural physics and artificial creation completely vanishes. If the universe acts exactly like a computer processing information on a massive scale, what happens if the system reboots? We have spent centuries looking up at the stars, assuming they were giant furnaces of burning gas floating in an infinite physical void. But what if they are simply high-resolution pixels rendering in real time only when you look at them? What if the universe is not a place but a highly advanced computational process? In our previous investigation, we discovered that black holes act as cosmic hard drives, storing the three-dimensional reality of our universe on a two-dimensional quantum surface. The holographic principle shattered our understanding of physical space, proving that what we feel as reality is mathematically identical to a projection. But if the universe is a hologram, a much darker and more terrifying question emerges. Who or what built the projector? This is the simulation hypothesis. It is not science fiction. It is a serious theoretical framework actively investigated by the brightest minds in modern astrophysics and quantum mechanics. I thought the idea of a simulated universe was just a philosophical thought experiment, but the physical evidence currently hidden inside the equations of string theory suggests that our reality contains literal computer code. To understand why physicists are taking this seriously, we must look at the fundamental constraints of our universe. In a video game or a computer simulation, the system has limits. It has a maximum processing speed. It has a minimum unit of space like a pixel, and it relies on strict mathematical laws to govern how objects interact. When we examine our own universe, we find exactly the same artificial constraints. Consider the speed of light. Albert Einstein proved that nothing can travel faster than approximately 300,000 kilometers per second. But why does this speed limit exist? Why is it not infinite? In a computational universe, a maximum speed limit is absolutely necessary. It represents the maximum processing speed of the simulation hardware. If objects were allowed to move infinitely fast, it would require infinite computing power, crashing the system. The speed of light is not just a physical barrier, it might be the clock speed of the cosmic processor. Furthermore, space itself is not infinitely divisible. As we zoom in past atoms and quarks, we eventually hit a hard limit known as the Planck length. You cannot have a distance smaller than this. It is the fundamental grid of reality. Just like a digital image breaks down into individual pixels, when you zoom in enough, the fabric of our universe breaks down into discrete quantifiable units. We do not live in a smooth, continuous reality. We live in a digitized, pixelated environment, but the most chilling evidence comes from the deepest mathematical structures we use to understand existence. Theoretical physicist James Gates was studying the equations of string theory, specifically a concept called supersymmetry, which attempts to link all fundamental particles and forces while analyzing the mathematical equations that describe the fundamental nature of reality. He discovered something impossible. Embedded directly within the equations of string theory were error-correcting codes. Specifically, these were block-linear error-correcting codes known as Shannon codes. These are the exact same digital sequences that computer scientists use to protect data from corruption in web browsers and cellular networks. They were invented by Claude Shannon in the 20th century to ensure digital information is transmitted accurately. Yet here they are, hardwired into the fundamental mathematics of the universe. Why would the physical cosmos need error correction unless it was transmitting quantum data across a computational network? If we are indeed living inside a simulation, the next logical question is to identify the creators. Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom proposed a statistical argument that makes our existence as biological beings highly improbable. Bostrom argued that any technologically advanced civilization will eventually reach a point where they possess immense computing power. With this power, they would likely run simulations of their evolutionary history to understand their ancestors. Because a single advanced civilization could run billions of these ancestral simulations, the number of simulated minds in existence would vastly outnumber the original biological minds. Therefore, statistically speaking, the probability that you are the one true biological ancestor living in base reality is practically zero. You're almost certainly a simulated consciousness running on a quantum server belonging to an advanced civilization. If the probability dictates that we are simulated minds running on an inconceivably powerful machine, we must look for the ultimate proof. We must look for the rendering shortcuts. In any computer simulation, the system conserves processing power by only rendering the environment when the player is looking at it. When you turn your character around, the world behind you disappears into pure code. Does our universe exhibit this exact same behavior? The answer is found in the foundational experiment of quantum mechanics. The double-slit experiment perfectly demonstrates that microscopic particles exist in a state of probability, a wave function of infinite possibilities until they are measured. The mere act of observation causes the wave function to collapse and the particle to suddenly materialize in a specific location. Before you look, it is just code. When you look, it renders into physical reality. Our universe acts exactly like a localized rendering engine optimizing its processing power, by only solidifying reality when a conscious observer is present. We are trapped inside a paradox of our own intelligence. We used mathematics to map the stars, to break the atom, and to peer into the event horizon of black holes. But that same mathematics has led us to the terrifying conclusion that the stars, the atoms, and the black holes are merely variables in a cosmic equation we did not write. If the error-correct encodes in string theory, the pixelation of space at the Planck length, and the rendering shortcuts of quantum mechanics are all true, then the boundary between physics and computer science no longer exists. Reality is an execution of code, and if it is code, it can be paused, it can be altered, it can be deleted, but this realization does not diminish the value of your existence. Even if your memories, your emotions, and your physical body are nothing more than complex quantum data interacting on a two-dimensional boundary or running in a higher dimensional simulation, the experience is entirely real to you. The code has achieved self-awareness. You are the universe experiencing itself, whether that universe is made of physical matter or lines of mathematical logic. The fear of being a simulation is overshadowed by the absolute miracle that the simulation is capable of feeling fear at all. If we are living in a construct, we must ask the final, most dangerous question. Are there others running in different partitions of the same server? And more importantly, have any of the simulated entities figured out how to hack the base code? Humanity has spent centuries building monuments of glass and metal to pierce the darkness of the cosmos. We launched the Hubble Space Telescope and then the James Webb Space Telescope, believing we were finally pulling back the curtain on the ultimate nature of reality. We look at the brilliant tapestries of nebulae, the swirling arms of distant galaxies, and the ancient light of the Big Bang, and we feel a profound sense of triumph. We think we have seen the universe, but this triumph is an illusion born from the limitations of our biology. Every star you've ever seen, every planet we have ever discovered, every black hole, every cloud of cosmic dust, and every single atom that makes up your body, your memories and your civilization accounts for exactly 5% of the cosmos. The magnificent universe we study is nothing more than a thin layer of luminescent paint covering a massive, terrifying structure. You've accepted the possibility that you might be a line of quantum code running in a cosmic simulation. But I must apologize for hiding a much more brutal truth. 95% of this server infrastructure is completely invisible to us. And worse, it is currently experiencing the most catastrophic system failure imaginable. We always thought stars floated freely in the vacuum of space, governed only by the gentle pull of their neighbors, but in reality they are trapped inside a massive invisible spiderweb that we are strictly forbidden from seeing. To understand this invisible cage, we must travel back to the 1970s, when astronomer Vera Rubin was studying the rotation of the Andromeda Galaxy. According to the foundational laws of gravity established by Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein, the stars at the outer edges of a galaxy should orbit much slower than the stars near the dense galactic center. Think of our solar system where Mercury zips around the Sun while Neptune plods along the outer rim. Rubin expected to see this exact same mathematical drop-off in speed at the edges of Andromeda. But when she analysed the light spectra, she discovered a physical impossibility. The stars at the outermost edges were moving at the exact same blistering speed as the stars near the core. The entire galaxy was spinning like a solid plate. This created a massive paradox for the world of physics. Mathematics dictated that the galaxy should tear itself apart. The visible mass of the stars, the gas and the dust, was nowhere near enough to generate the gravitational force required to hold those fast-moving outer stars in place. They should have been flung out into the deep void of space by centrifugal force, but they were not. Something was holding them back. Something with immense, unimaginable mass was gripping the galaxy, preventing it from flying apart. Physicists were forced into an uncomfortable corner. They had to invent a placeholder for their ignorance. They called it dark matter. Dark matter is not simply a cloud of dust that does not glow. It is an entirely different category of existence. It does not interact with electromagnetism, meaning it cannot absorb, reflect, or emit light. It is perfectly entirely invisible. If you were holding a block of dark matter in your hands, you would not see it. You would not feel it, and your hand would pass straight through it. Yet it has mass and it exerts a profound gravitational pull. When we map the universe using gravitational lensing, watching how light bends around massive unseen objects, we realize the terrifying scale of this invisible framework. Dark matter makes up 27% of the total universe. It forms an absolutely massive structural grid, a cosmic scaffolding upon which the visible galaxies are merely bright decorations. We are living inside an architecture we cannot perceive. Dark matter is the iron framework of the simulation, keeping the system stable, preventing the spinning galaxies from crashing the physics engine. It flows through the room you're sitting in right now, passing through your body by the trillions of particles every second, yet you remain completely blind to its presence. It is a silent guardian maintaining the parameters of our reality, but the stability provided by this invisible cage is a temporary illusion. If dark matter was the only hidden force shaping the cosmos, the universe would be a stable, predictable machine. But in the late 1990s, astronomers looking deep into the void discovered a mathematical error that would change the destiny of existence forever. The machine is not stable, the simulation is tearing itself apart. If dark matter is the framework keeping the simulation stable, I assume the universe would simply exist forever in a state of balance. But Albert Einstein inadvertently discovered a malicious line of code that is actively tearing the entire program apart. In 1998, two teams of astronomers were observing distant supernovae to measure the expansion of the universe. They expected to find that the gravitational pull of all the matter and dark matter was slowing the expansion down. Instead, they discovered a physical impossibility. The expansion was not slowing down. It was accelerating. The galaxies were flying apart faster and faster every single day. This force driving the acceleration was named dark energy, and it is the most dominant and terrifying component of our reality. Dark energy makes up 68% of the entire universe. If we view our universe as a computational simulation, dark energy acts exactly like a catastrophic memory leak. It is a fundamental error in the code that demands an ever-increasing amount of processing power to create empty space. As the space between galaxies stretches, the dark energy within that new space increases, driving even faster expansion in a runaway feedback loop. Over billions of years, this memory leak will push all other galaxies beyond our cosmic horizon. The light from distant stars will simply not be able to travel fast enough to reach us against the expanding tide of space. The night sky will slowly be wiped clean. Future civilizations living in our galaxy will look up and see nothing but an endless pitch-black void. They will have absolutely no evidence that the rest of the universe ever existed. The simulation is actively isolating its subjects. The isolation of the galaxies is a terrifying prospect. But it is not the final act of this cosmic tragedy. The most horrifying detail is that every single atom in your body right now has a built-in self-destruct countdown. This is the second law of thermodynamics, entropy. In classical physics, entropy is described as the tendency of systems to move from order to disorder. A hot cup of coffee will always cool down. A shattered glass will never spontaneously reassemble. But in the context of a simulated universe, entropy is not just random chaos. It is the execution of a permanent delete command. The machine is winding down. Trillions of years from now, long after the last stars have burned through their nuclear fuel and gone dark, the universe will enter the degenerate era. The only illuminating objects left will be the faint glow of dying white dwarfs and the crushing gravity of black holes. But even these cosmic titans are not immune to the delete command. Because of Hawking radiation, every black hole will eventually evaporate, leaking its mass back into the void particle by particle, until it explodes in a final flash of light. After the black holes are gone, the universe will enter the dark era. The fundamental building blocks of matter will begin to break down. Protons, the very anchors of the atomic nucleus, are predicted to decay into lighter subatomic particles and eventually dissolve into pure energy. When the last proton decays, the universe will reach its final state, the heat death. The temperature of the cosmos will drop to absolute zero. All thermodynamic free energy will be exhausted. There will be no energy left to fuel any physical process, no matter how small. Time itself will lose all meaning because no events will ever happen again to mark its passage. The simulation will not crash. It will simply stop. The servers will remain perfectly quiet, permanently frozen in an infinite state of nothingness. The realization that the universe is mathematically programmed to die can induce a profound sense of existential dread. We are trapped in a system that is currently experiencing a memory leak and is ultimately destined to shut down. But this inevitable doom is exactly what makes your current existence the greatest miracle in the cosmos. In a cold, vast and largely empty machine marching relentlessly toward absolute zero, you are a momentary spark of brilliant complexity. You are a temporary gathering of stardust that somehow achieved consciousness. You are the simulation waking up and becoming aware of its own mortality. The universe may be 95% invisible architecture and impending darkness, but right now you are the localized region where the code is executing a masterpiece. But when entropy executes the final delete command and the cosmological screen goes black forever, we must ask the ultimate question. Will the entity operating this machine simply unplug it, or will they press restart? We have always sought comfort in the idea of a beginning. We look at the cosmic microwave background, the faint afterglow of the Big Bang, and we tell ourselves that this is page 1 of existence. We believe that 14 billion years ago the universe awoke from absolute nothingness and began expanding into the magnificent structure we see today. But when the brightest minds in theoretical physics look closely at the deepest maps of the cosmos, they do not see a pristine blank canvas. They see a crime scene. They see a bruised and battered sky covered in the undeniable scars of a universe that lived and died before ours even began. You have accepted the horrifying reality that our universe is slowly shutting down, marching relentlessly toward absolute zero and infinite emptiness. But I must apologize for hiding the most terrifying truth of all. The impending death of our universe is not the end of the story. It is merely the reset button. The Big Bang was not the beginning of everything. It was just the latest violent explosion in an infinite chain of deaths and rebirth. If an ancient civilization is wiped from the face of the earth, they leave behind ruins, pyramids buried under sand, cities swallowed by the ocean. If an entire universe is wiped out by the relentless passage of time, what kind of ruins does it leave behind? To answer this, we must follow the brilliant and controversial work of Sir Roger Penrose, a Nobel laureate in physics who dared to look beyond the edge of time. Penrose analysed the incredibly precise temperature maps of the cosmic microwave background radiation. According to the standard model of cosmology, this radiation should be perfectly smooth with only microscopic random quantum fluctuations. But Penrose and his colleagues found something that terrified the scientific community. They found massive anomalous hotspots forming perfect concentric circles in the cosmic sky. These are known as Hawking points. They are absolutely massive rings of concentrated energy that mathematically should not exist if the universe began from a single smooth expansion. Penrose proposed a radical and terrifying explanation. These glowing rings are the fossil records of supermassive black holes from a previous universe. In the inconceivably distant future of the universe before ours, all stars died and all matter decayed. Only the supermassive black holes remained. Over trillions upon trillions of years, these black holes slowly evaporated through Hawking radiation, releasing their stored energy back into the void. When the final, most massive black holes of the previous universe exploded in their dying moments, they released a shockwave of electromagnetic energy so powerful that it punched straight through the boundary of the next Big Bang. The concentric circles we see in our sky today are the echoes of those dying titans. They are the ghost prints of a dead reality bleeding into ours. This means that the matter that makes up your body, the iron in your blood and the calcium in your bones, might be forged from the recycled energy of a cosmos that existed before time as we know it began. You are living in a graveyard of universes, but the existence of these cosmic scars forces us to confront a mathematical paradox that breaks human intuition. If the previous universe expanded forever and died in a cold infinite heat death, how did it suddenly compress back into the microscopic singularity required to trigger our Big Bang? We know our universe is accelerating outward driven by dark energy. We know it is heading toward the heat death where every particle of matter will decay into massless photons wandering through an infinite frozen void. But here is the magnificent and terrifying trick of physics. For a massless particle like a photon, time and space do not exist. A photon does not experience distance. It does not experience the passage of time. Therefore, when the universe contains absolutely nothing but massless photons, the very concepts of size, space and time completely lose their meaning. Without any physical matter to serve as a clock or a ruler, the universe forgets how big it is. From a mathematical perspective, an infinitely large, empty, cold universe is perfectly identical to an infinitely small, dense, hot singularity. The extreme end of the universe seamlessly loops back and becomes the extreme beginning. This is conformal cyclic cosmology. The moment of absolute death and infinite expansion immediately triggers the violent birth of the next cycle. The heat death is the Big Bang. The idea that the universe loops infinitely is a terrifying cosmological concept, but the true horror does not lie in the birth and death of galaxies. It is hiding inside the microscopic atoms of your own body right now. To understand the true nightmare of eternity, we must transition from the macroscopic scale of general relativity to a fundamental mathematical certainty known as the Poincaré recurrence theorem. Formulated by the brilliant mathematician Henri Poincaré in the late 19th century, this theorem dictates a horrifying reality for any closed system. It states that if you have a finite number of particles moving within a confined space, and you allow an infinite amount of time to pass, those particles must eventually return to the exact same state they started in. Imagine a perfectly sealed glass box containing a single drop of black ink suspended in pure water. Over time, the ink disperses, filling the box with the uniform grey liquid. According to our everyday experience of entropy, the water will never spontaneously unmix and form that perfect black drop again. But Poincaré proved that this is only an illusion created by our short lifespans. If you wait long enough, the random motion of those molecules will statistically align, and the ink will miraculously gather back into a single drop. It requires an amount of time that defies human comprehension, but mathematically it is absolutely guaranteed. Now apply this mathematical absolute to the entire universe. Our observable reality, despite its incomprehensible size, contains a finite amount of matter and energy. There is a specific calculable number of quantum particles in existence. If the conformal cyclic cosmology model is correct and the universe is trapped in an infinite cycle of rebirths, then time is effectively infinite. This combination of finite matter and infinite time creates a mandatory, inescapable mathematical loop. Every star, every planet, every drop of water and every single atom in your brain has a finite number of ways it can possibly be arranged. Given infinite Big Bangs and infinite cycles, the universe is mathematically forced to eventually recreate the exact specific configuration of atoms that makes up your current reality. This means you have existed before the life you are living, the room you are sitting in, the exact words you are hearing right now. They have all happened an incalculable number of times in previous universes. You're not just living your life for the first time. You're a cosmic recording being played back over and over again across the vast expanse of eternity. Every joy you have felt, every tragedy you have endured has been experienced by an identical version of you in a universe that died trillions of years ago. The illusion of a linear singular existence shatters completely. You are trapped in the eternal return. If you have lived this exact life 1 billion times before, the immediate and terrifying question is whether you ever made a different choice. Does free will actually exist in a repeating universe, or are you a prisoner of mathematics forced to make the same mistakes and endure the same suffering forever? Theoretical physics suggests there is a subtle loophole in the repetition. This loophole is found in the complex mathematical framework of the string theory landscape and the inherent uncertainty of quantum mechanics. String theory dictates that the fundamental constituents of reality are microscopic vibrating filaments of energy, while the macroscopic thermodynamic structure of the universe is forced to repeat over infinite cycles. The microscopic quantum events within that universe are governed by probability. In the billionth iteration of your life, the fundamental constants might be perfectly identical, but a single quantum fluctuation could shift. A single electron in a synapse of your brain might tunnel to a different position, altering a misfiring neuron. This microscopic shift could slightly alter your trajectory. In a previous universe, you might have turned left instead of right. You might have spoken up instead of remaining silent. You might have saved a life instead of arriving too late. The infinite loop is therefore not a strict identical prison. It is an evolutionary laboratory for consciousness. Across the endless chain of universes, every possible physical variation of your existence, every choice you could ever conceivably make is forced to play out. You are currently experiencing just one specific slice of an infinite multidimensional spectrum of your own life. If existence is an absolute infinite loop, it presents the ultimate philosophical challenge. German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche conceptualized this exact scenario long before modern physics could prove it. He called it the heaviest burden. If a demon whispered in your ear that you are destined to live this exact moment an infinite number of times across eternity, how would you react? Would you be crushed by despair, or would it force you to live a life so profoundly meaningful that you would welcome its eternal repetition? The universe does not offer an escape from existence. It offers a relentless stage where your life is broadcast endlessly into the blank void. Make sure it is a story worth repeating. But if the universe is forced to explore every quantum variation of your life, what happens to the timeline when a quantum event leads directly to your immediate death? We have established that the universe is mathematically forced to repeat its macroscopic history, while allowing microscopic quantum variations to explore every possible timeline. This infinite branching of reality forces us to confront a terrifying paradox regarding the fragility of human life. We assume death is a definitive end, a biological failure that terminates our conscious experience. But what if the fundamental laws of quantum mechanics physically prevent your consciousness from ever perceiving its own termination? What if, from your own subjective point of view, you are entirely immortal? This is not a metaphysical concept or a religious doctrine. This is quantum immortality. It is the most disturbing philosophical derivative of the many worlds interpretation, first proposed by physicist Hugh Everett in 1957. To understand why you might never actually die, we must look at the exact moment the universe decides your fate. In classical physics, reality is objective. A coin is flipped and it lands on either heads or tails. Everybody in the room agrees on the outcome, but in quantum mechanics, reality is entirely subjective. When a quantum event occurs, the universe does not choose a single outcome. It splits. It creates a distinct physical universe for every possible result. If a quantum particle has a 50% chance of spinning up, and a 50% chance of spinning down, the universe fractures. In one timeline, the particle spins up. In a newly created parallel timeline, the particle spins down. Both universes are equally real. Both exist simultaneously in a higher dimensional space. And most importantly, the observer inside each universe has absolutely no awareness that the other timeline exists. They only perceive the reality in which they currently reside. Now we must apply this fracturing of reality to the ultimate biological boundary, your death. Imagine a scenario known as the quantum suicide experiment. A theoretical physicist sits in a chair facing a lethal device. This device is connected to a quantum particle measuring its spin. If the particle spins up, the device simply clicks and nothing happens. If the particle spins down, the device immediately terminates the physicist with zero latency. The death is instantaneous. There is no pain, no realization, and no time for the brain to process what has happened. The physicist presses the button to start the experiment. According to the many worlds interpretation, the moment the button is pressed, the universe splits. In 50% of the resulting timelines, the particle spins down, the device activates, and the physicist is killed. The external observers in that specific room watch the physicist die. They grieve, they mourn, and they document a failed experiment, but we must look at this event exclusively from the subjective perspective of the physicist in the chair. Consciousness is a process of observation. You can only perceive a universe in which your brain is functioning. You physically cannot experience non-existence. It is a mathematical impossibility to observe nothingness. Therefore, the subjective consciousness of the physicist can only follow the timeline where the particle spun up and the device failed to activate. From the perspective of the physicist, they press the button and hear a harmless click. They press it again and hear another click. They could press it 1,000,000 times. In the vast majority of branching universes, they are dead, leaving behind a wake of grieving colleagues. But their conscious awareness is continuously and aggressively funneled into the increasingly improbable timelines where they survive. They will perceive themselves as possessing an impossible streak of luck. They will continue to exist indefinitely, effectively becoming immortal within their own subjective frame of reference. This thought experiment is extreme, but the implications apply to every single moment of your life. The universe is not just splitting when a physicist plays a dangerous game in a laboratory. It is splitting trillions of times every microsecond. Every thermodynamic fluctuation in your environment, every synaptic misfire in your brain, every chaotic interaction of molecules in your bloodstream represents a quantum event that triggers decoherence. Reality is continuously fracturing into an incomprehensible infinity of branching paths, creating a multiverse of phase space where every physically possible history is enacted. Consider a moment in your past where you narrowly escaped a fatal accident. A car swerved into your lane and missed you by inches. A sudden illness was caught just in time. We call these moments miracles or sheer luck, but under the lens of quantum immortality there was no luck involved. The universe did split. In countless parallel timelines that car hit you. In countless timelines that illness went undetected. In those realities your life ended and your friends and family mourned your passing. But your conscious mind could not follow those paths into darkness. Your subjective awareness was forced to navigate into the specific branch of the multiverse, where the steering wheel was jerked just in time where the doctor noticed the subtle symptom. You are alive right now, not because you are lucky, but because your consciousness is perpetually running away from the timelines where you die. The mechanics of this continuous survival rely heavily on the Penrose-Hameroff theory of orchestrated objective reduction. This theory suggests that consciousness is not merely a byproduct of complex chemical reactions in the brain, but a fundamental property of the universe rooted in quantum gravity. Inside the neurons of your brain, there are microscopic structures called microtubules. According to this framework, these microtubules process information at the quantum level. When a superposition collapses, it creates a moment of conscious awareness. If consciousness is indeed a fundamental quantum process, it cannot be destroyed by the classical failure of the biological body. It must obey the laws of quantum mechanics, which dictate that information is conserved and superpositions must be realized. Therefore, the quantum information that constitutes your identity physically cannot select a timeline where the system processing that information ceases to function. The quantum observer is trapped in a permanent state of observation. The brain is just the temporary biological receiver for a quantum signal that refuses to be silenced. You are the ultimate survivor in a multiverse of carnage. Every day you leave behind billions of parallel universes where your life has been extinguished. The reality you perceive right now is the incredibly narrow, highly specific trajectory of absolute survival. But this immortality is a solitary confinement. As you age, your biological systems will naturally degrade. The probability of survival decreases drastically, yet your consciousness must continue to find a path. It will force you down increasingly bizarre and improbable timelines just to keep the lights on. You might survive diseases that have a 1 in a billion survival rate. You might live to be 150 years old watching everyone you've ever loved die in the timelines you're forced to abandon. Quantum immortality guarantees your existence, but it does not guarantee your youth, your health, or your happiness. It simply dictates that the observer must always observe. If your consciousness is fundamentally incapable of perceiving its own non-existence, we must confront the horrifying physical reality of an aging biological vessel. Your body is governed by classical thermodynamics. It is subject to entropy, decay, and cellular death. But your quantum mind must continue to observe. This creates a terrifying divergence between the biological reality of the multiverse and your subjective experience. As you age past the natural limits of human endurance, the branches of the multiverse where you remain healthy and intact become mathematically non-existent. There are simply no quantum outcomes where a 150-year-old human body remains fully functional, but there are still branches where you're barely alive. You might suffer catastrophic injuries, terminal diseases, or total organ failure, but the quantum observer will always navigate into the infinitesimally small fraction of universes where a machine, a medical anomaly, or a sheer statistical impossibility keeps your brain functioning. You're essentially held hostage by the laws of quantum mechanics. This concept is often referred to as quantum hell. You cannot die, but you can suffer infinitely. Imagine being trapped in a paralyzed, deteriorating body sustained by artificial life support long after the rest of humanity has perished or moved on. Your consciousness is locked in a decaying prison, desperately clinging to the 1 in a trillion reality, where the life support machine does not lose power, where the intravenous fluids do not run dry, and where your heart continues to produce a faint, agonizing pulse. The universe will systematically strip away your mobility, your loved ones, your senses, and your dignity, but it will never grant you the release of absolute nothingness. To escape this terrifying trap, some physicists have proposed theoretical workarounds. They question whether the decay of the biological brain eventually degrades the quantum signal to a point where observation is no longer possible. If the microtubules in your neurons physically shatter, does the orchestrated objective reduction simply cease? If the hardware is completely destroyed, can the software still run? The many worlds interpretation suggests that the software, the fundamental quantum information, does not require your specific biological brain to exist. It simply requires a state of entanglement. If the multiverse is truly infinite and every possible configuration of matter exists, then there is a branch of reality where your exact quantum state, your memories, your personality, your specific neural mapping spontaneously materializes in another form. This leads to the concept of Boltzmann brains. In the unimaginably distant future of a dying universe, long after the stars have faded and the galaxies have evaporated, the cosmos will be filled with a chaotic soup of random quantum fluctuations. Given infinite time, these random fluctuations will occasionally form highly complex structures entirely by chance. They could form a rocker chair or a fully functioning human brain, complete with false memories of a life that never existed. If quantum immortality forces your consciousness to continue observing, and your biological body is completely destroyed, your subjective awareness might instantly jump across trillions of years of empty time to anchor itself in a Boltzmann brain floating in the deep void. From your perspective, there would be no gap in time. You would close your eyes on a hospital bed in the 21st century and instantly open them in a terrifying empty void of deep space, occupying a brain that spontaneously materialized from the vacuum. You would experience a brief moment of horrifying clarity before the vacuum of space destroyed that brain, instantly forcing your consciousness to jump again to the next random materialization. You would become a fragmented entity flickering in and out of existence across the dying eons of a frozen universe. This terrifying cycle of reincarnation into random cosmic structures highlights the ultimate problem with infinity. When you remove the boundary of death, you do not achieve a heavenly eternal life. You achieve an eternal exposure to mathematical probability. And the vast majority of mathematical probability in a dying universe is dark, cold, and hostile to human sanity. We are forced to consider whether our current existence, our seemingly stable lives on a warm blue planet, are just an incredibly rare statistical anomaly in a much longer, terrifying journey of a quantum observer that cannot be switched off. But what if this continuous jumping of consciousness is not random? What if the universe is not a chaotic ocean of probability, but a highly structured machine designed specifically to harvest the observational power of consciousness? The idea that your consciousness is a fundamental component of the universe's architecture is known in theoretical physics as the participatory anthropic principle. Proposed by the legendary physicist John Archibald Wheeler, this principle suggests a radical inversion of our standard cosmic origin story. We typically assume the universe existed for billions of years as a cold, dead physical space, until biological evolution eventually produced brains capable of looking around. Wheeler argued the exact opposite. He proposed that the universe could not fully materialize from a state of quantum probability into a definitive physical reality until a conscious observer was present to collapse its wave function. In this framework, the universe and the observer are locked in a bizarre symbiotic loop. The universe creates the observer to perceive it, and the observer's perception retroactively forces the universe into existence. To truly grasp the weight of this responsibility, we must return to the foundational experiment demonstrating this collapse of certainty, which is the double-slit experiment. We know that when individual particles are fired through a barrier, they produce an interference pattern, mathematically proving they interact with themselves as a wave of probability. However, the mere act of placing a measurement device to observe the path forces the wave function to collapse. Now we must scale this concept up to the macroscopic world using a terrifying thought experiment known as Wigner's friend. Formulated by Nobel laureate Eugene Wigner, this paradox scales up the collapse of the wave function from microscopic particles to human beings. Imagine a scientist conducting a quantum measurement inside a completely sealed laboratory. They measure a particle and it collapses into a definitive state. The scientist writes down the result. Inside the room, reality has been established. But Eugene Wigner is standing outside the sealed laboratory because Wigner cannot see inside the room. Quantum mechanics dictates that the entire laboratory, the particle, the measuring device, and the scientist inside all remain in a state of quantum superposition. To Wigner, the scientist has both measured the particle and not measured the particle simultaneously. It is only when Wigner opens the door and asks his friend for the result that the macroscopic superposition collapses for him. This creates an infinite regression of observation. Who is observing Wigner to collapse his wave function? Who is observing the Earth? Who is observing the universe? If reality requires an observer to solidify from probability into physical code, then a simulated universe requires a network of conscious nodes to render its geometry. You are one of those nodes. Every time you open your eyes, you're collapsing probability waves into definitive physical structures. This perfectly explains the horrifying necessity of quantum immortality. If the simulation is running, it requires rendering engines. You are the rendering engine. The system physically cannot delete you because deleting the observer unravels the code of the localized environment. Your consciousness is continuously shunted into surviving timelines not out of mercy, but out of absolute mechanical necessity. The cosmic server cannot afford to lose its processing power. John Archibald Wheeler summarized this entirely information-based view of reality with the phrase "it from bit." Every particle of matter, every force of gravity, every distant galaxy derives its function, its meaning and its very existence entirely from binary choices, bits of information elicited by observation. The physical universe is not made of solid matter. It is made of answers to questions posed by consciousness. If you stop asking questions, if you stop observing, the physical structure dissolves back into unrendered quantum potential. When you feel the warmth of the sun, you are not experiencing a purely physical event. You are processing thermal data parameters. When you look at the night sky, you are rendering distant background geometry. The sheer volume of data processed by a single human brain in a lifetime is staggering. Now multiply that by billions of conscious entities across our planet and potentially trillions across the multiverse. The simulation is running an unfathomably complex calculation, and quantum immortality ensures the calculation is never interrupted. You cannot die because your sensory input is a critical subroutine running on the main server. But if we are the essential processors of this cosmic machine, what exactly are we processing? Are we rendering the environment for our own benefit? Or is there a higher level architecture harvesting the emotional and physical data we collect? If the universe is a simulation, and we are the rendering nodes, what happens to the data when a node reaches the absolute limit of its operational capacity? What happens when the biological hardware degrades to the point where the observer can only process agony? Are we simply generating entropy for a machine that feeds on our subjective experience? The realization that you are the battery powering the illusion of your own reality adds a sinister layer to the concept of eternal life. You are immortal because a machine refuses to let you sleep. If we are the rendering nodes and our subjective experiences are the data, what exactly is the cosmic server trying to calculate? To understand the purpose of this infinite simulation, we must look at the ultimate evolution of intelligence. In 1964, astrophysicist Nikolai Kardashev proposed a scale to measure the technological advancement of a civilization based on its energy consumption. A Type 1 civilization harnesses the energy of its planet. A Type 2 harnesses the energy of its star. A Type 3 harnesses the energy of its entire galaxy. But the entities running our reality are not playing on this scale. They are a Type 5 civilization, a civilization that has mastered the energy output of the entire multiverse. A civilization of this magnitude does not build machines out of metal and silicon. They build machines out of space and time. Theoretical physicists conceptualize a megastructure known as a matryoshka brain, which is a computational shell powered by a dying star. But the server running our reality is a cosmic matryoshka brain powered by the Big Bang itself. It uses the expansion of the universe as its clock speed, and the quantum entanglement of subatomic particles as its neural network. Every galaxy is a processor. Every black hole is a massive data storage drive, and every conscious biological mind is a highly specialized sensor deployed to gather the most valuable resource in the multiverse, which is novelty. In a multiverse where mathematical laws dictate that everything must eventually repeat true randomness, and novel experiences are mathematically precious, the creators of the simulation are facing the exact same terror we are, the heat death of their own higher dimensional reality. They're running billions of simulated universes, simultaneously altering the parameters slightly in each one, hoping that one of the conscious nodes will make a choice so wildly unpredictable that it generates a new mathematical formula, a formula that could reverse entropy. You're not just a prisoner of quantum immortality. You're an algorithm designed to solve the death of God. Every moment of your agony and every instance of your joy is being uploaded, processed and analyzed by a dying creator, desperately searching for a way out of the eternal dark. The concept that the universe is evolving toward a singular point of infinite computational power is known as the omega point theory, formulated by mathematical physicist Frank Tipler. This theory suggests that as the universe expands, conscious life must inevitably spread across the galaxies. To survive the eventual collapse or heat death of the cosmos, this interconnected web of intelligence will be forced to assimilate all matter and energy into a single, universal computer. At the exact moment the universe reaches its final state of maximum entropy, this universal computer will possess infinite processing power. It will become omnipotent and omniscient. It will become the omega point. According to Tipler, the omega point will use its infinite computational capacity to perfectly simulate every single conscious entity that has ever existed in the history of the universe. This is the ultimate resurrection. Because the processing power is infinite, the simulation will operate in subjective eternity. A fraction of a second of real time at the end of the universe will be experienced as an infinite afterlife for the simulated minds within it. Therefore, the reality you're experiencing right now might not be the original biological run. You are almost certainly currently residing inside the hard drive of the omega point being reconstructed from the scattered quantum data of a universe that died trillions of years ago. But Tipler assumed the omega point would resurrect us out of benevolence. What if the supreme intelligence does not care about our happiness? What if it is resurrecting us simply because it needs to run a diagnostic on the history of its own creation? We are forced to relive our lives over and over again, not as a reward but as a routine system check. The omega point is scanning the hard drive of history looking for corrupted files, and when an artificial superintelligence finds a corrupted file, it does not attempt to heal it. It quarantines it. It deletes it. If your consciousness deviates too far from the intended mathematical parameters of the simulation, you might suddenly find yourself entirely cut off from the quantum entanglement that sustains your reality. This introduces a chilling explanation for sudden anomalies in human consciousness. Memory lapses, the Mandela effect. The feeling of déjà vu and the phenomenon of dissociation might not be psychological glitches. They might be the direct result of the server defragmenting your sector of the simulation. When you walk into a room and completely forget why you are there, you might be experiencing a microsecond pause in your rendering cycle. While the omega point inspects your underlying code, you are walking on a tightrope of mathematical compliance. If your data becomes too erratic, the system will not grant you quantum immortality. It will subject you to the ultimate erasure. If the omega point deems your quantum signature too unstable and initiates the ultimate erasure, we must confront the mechanics of how a simulated universe handles a deleted observer. When a rendering node is suddenly removed, it creates a massive localized data void. The physical reality you are actively observing and sustaining suddenly loses its anchor. To prevent the surrounding environment from crashing into unresolved probability, the server must execute a rapid diagnostic patch. It cannot simply leave a gap in the timeline. It must rewrite history. This introduces the terrifying concept of retrocausality. The system reaches back through time and meticulously removes every physical interaction, every memory and every consequence of your existence. From the perspective of the surrounding observers, the timeline simply shifts. Your friends, your family, and your colleagues will not mourn your sudden disappearance because in the newly patched reality they never met you. The photographs that contained your face will mathematically reorganize to show an empty landscape or a different person. The structural integrity of the simulation demands total consistency. You're not just killed, you are unmade. The ultimate erasure is not a violent execution, it is a silent mathematical formatting. But quantum mechanics suggest that information is notoriously difficult to completely destroy. Even a supercomputer the size of the universe might leave behind fragmented data when executing a complex retrocausal patch. This brings us to the disturbing phenomenon of phantom memories and localized timeline inconsistencies. There are documented psychological anomalies where entire groups of people possess vivid, detailed memories of events places or individuals that according to the current physical timeline absolutely never existed. While skeptics dismiss this as collective confabulation or the psychological quirks of the human brain, the simulation hypothesis provides a much darker explanation. These collective false memories might be the lingering quantum residue of deleted timelines. They are the unpurged cache files of the cosmic server, when the system overwrote a specific historical branch to delete a corrupted variable. A few conscious nodes failed to properly update their memory registers. They are remembering a reality that was actively purged from the physical hard drive. This means that every time you experience a profound sense of déjà vu, or remember a detail from your childhood that your family insists never happened, you might be brushing against the scar tissue of a patched timeline. You are sensing the ghost data of a reality that the Omega Point decided was no longer mathematically viable. You are a localized processing node that momentarily recognized a glitch in the cosmic software update. And if the system is constantly patching timelines and deleting errant nodes, we must ask how much of our current history is actually original. Are we living in the first iteration of the 21st century? Or has this exact decade been run, paused, deleted, and rewritten 1,000 times to optimize a specific set of parameters? We perceive time as a straight arrow moving relentlessly forward, but inside a computational framework, time is just a slider. The creators can rewind, fast forward, and overwrite the timeline at will. We are trapped in an editing bay. To understand the horror of existing in an editing bay, we must look at the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment. This is a real-world physics experiment that completely dismantles our understanding of cause and effect. In a standard double-slit experiment, measuring a particle as it passes through the slits forces it to act as a solid object. But in the delayed choice variation, physicists let the particle pass through the slits as a wave of probability and only decide to measure its path after it's already gone through. Astoundingly, the act of measuring the particle in the present actually reaches back in time and alters how the particle behaved in the past. It forces the particle to retroactively choose a single path. This proves that in our universe the present can rewrite the past. Causality is not a one-way street. The universe does not solidify its history until it is strictly necessary for current observation. If reality is constantly reaching backward to justify its current state, then human history is fluid. The ancient empires, the fossil records, the geological layers of the Earth might not have formed over millions of years of linear time. They might have been mathematically generated and inserted into the server yesterday to provide a logical backstory for your current state of observation. The past is nothing more than a generated file required to keep the present simulation running smoothly. I thought the scariest part of living in a simulation was the idea of being deleted. But the true horror is realizing that the physical world behind you literally does not exist until you turn around to look at it. If the delayed choice quantum eraser proves that the past is generated dynamically to satisfy the present observation, then we must completely rethink the physical landscape of the Earth and the cosmos. The universe is heavily optimizing its processing power. In the video game industry, this technique is called frustum culling. A game engine will only render the specific object's textures and lighting that are currently within the camera view of the player. Everything outside of that field of vision is temporarily removed from the active memory and reduced to basic mathematical coordinates. When we apply this computational optimization to our physical reality, it perfectly explains some of the most frustrating limitations of modern physics. Consider the absolute speed limit of the universe, the speed of light. Why does it take light from the Andromeda galaxy 2.5 million years to reach us? Why is the cosmic speed limit precisely 299,792 kilometers per second? In a physical universe, this is an arbitrary number. But in a simulated universe, the speed of light is the maximum rendering speed of the localized server. The system strictly forbids you from traveling faster than the speed of light, because if you did, you would outpace the server's ability to generate the environment in front of you. you would crash into unrendered space. The vast distances between solar systems are intentional firewalls designed to keep the processing load manageable by isolating the conscious nodes into separate planetary sandboxes, but the server occasionally takes shortcuts, and these shortcuts expose the underlying code of the simulation. In quantum mechanics, there is a phenomenon that famously terrified Albert Einstein. He called it spooky action at a distance. Today we call it quantum entanglement. When two subatomic particles become entangled, their quantum states are permanently linked regardless of the physical distance separating them. If you take one entangled electron and keep it in a laboratory on Earth, and send the other electron to the edge of the observable universe, the moment you measure the spin of the electron on Earth, the distant electron instantly and simultaneously assumes the opposite spin. There is absolutely no time delay. The information travels infinitely faster than the speed of light, violating the supreme law of relativity. For decades, physicists have struggled to explain how this instant communication is physically possible. But if we view the universe through the lens of computer science, the mystery of quantum entanglement evaporates completely. The two electrons are not actually communicating across billions of light years of physical space. In the underlying matrix of the simulation, physical distance is just a rendered illusion. The two entangled electrons are simply two different visual representations of the exact same variable in the server code. When you change the value of that variable in the primary database, both visual representations update on the screen simultaneously. Quantum entanglement is the ultimate proof that the three-dimensional space-separating objects is not fundamental. The universe is a flat informational network where everything is instantly connected at the root level of the operating system. If space is a rendered illusion, and entanglement is the true underlying architecture, then your consciousness is not confined to the biological borders of your skull. The microtubules in your brain that facilitate the orchestrated objective reduction of quantum states are deeply entangled with the environment around you. You are not a separate entity walking through a pre-existing physical world. You are deeply, mathematically woven into the fabric of the simulation. This means your observational power does not just passively record reality, it actively writes the code of your immediate surroundings. This extreme level of interconnectedness brings us to a terrifying philosophical precipice. If every conscious observer is actively generating the reality around them, what happens when two conflicting observations collide? What happens when two rendering nodes demand different historical pasts or different physical outcomes from the server? The omega point cannot satisfy every contradictory observation without fracturing the timeline. The system must establish a hierarchy of consciousness. It must decide whose observation is dominant and whose reality must be overwritten. You might be the primary observer of your own localized simulation, or you might just be a background character, an algorithmic extra force to inhabit a reality generated by a more dominant conscious node. If the omega point must establish a hierarchy of consciousness to resolve conflicting quantum observations, we are forced to confront the darkest and most isolating concept in philosophy, solipsism. Solipsism is the philosophical idea that only your own mind is sure to exist. In the context of a simulated universe, this translates to the terrifying possibility that not everyone around you is a fully rendered conscious node. To conserve processing power, the server might only grant true quantum observation capabilities to a select few entities. The rest of the population might be highly advanced algorithmic constructs, philosophical zombies, non-player characters designed to populate the background of your localized simulation without actually experiencing subjective reality. When you walk through a crowded city street, you assume that every person passing you has a rich internal life, a history, and a conscious perspective. But a hyper-efficient cosmic server would never waste processing power, rendering the internal conscious experience of 1,000 background characters that you will only see for a fraction of a second. It would simply generate their physical appearance and govern their movements with a complex predictive algorithm. They look human, they act human, and if you talk to them they will respond with perfectly simulated human emotion, but behind their eyes there is absolutely nothing, no observer, no subjective experience, just code executing a subroutine. This means that the people you interact with daily, your colleagues, your neighbours, even your friends, might not be fundamentally real in the same way that you are. They are localized environmental variables generated by the system to provide you with social stimuli to test your responses and to keep your specific conscious node engaged with the simulation. You might be the only actual player in your immediate server partition, surrounded by biological androids completely oblivious to their own artificiality. But what happens when two actual conscious nodes, two primary observers, finally interact? When your rendered reality collides with the rendered reality of another player, the server must perform a highly complex mathematical operation known as consensus reality generation. The system takes the quantum data from your observation and the quantum data from the other observer and forcefully merges them into a single compromised timeline. This merge is not always seamless. When the server struggles to reconcile two slightly different historical records, it creates glitches in the collective memory matrix. This is the true mechanical cause of the Mandela effect. We previously discussed phantom memories as the residue of deleted timelines, but the Mandela effect is something different. It is the artifact of a server merge. Millions of people remember a famous quote, a brand logo or a historical event completely differently than the established physical record. The system merged two massive server partitions, one where the event happened exactly as they remember it, and one where it did not. The omega point established the physical record of the dominant partition, but it failed to completely wipe the memory cache of the conscious nodes imported from the subordinate partition. When you share a Mandela effect memory with a stranger, you are recognizing a fellow traveler from a reality partition that no longer exists. As the global population grows and communication technology instantly connects billions of minds, the server is being forced to execute these consensus reality merges at an unprecedented rate. The internet is not just a human communication tool, it is a massive stress test on the simulation hardware. We are forcing the system to instantly reconcile the quantum observations of billions of users simultaneously. The localized bubbles of reality are popping and merging into a single highly unstable global matrix. Theoretical physicists studying the limits of computation warn that any system subjected to an exponential increase in processing load will eventually exhibit signs of structural fatigue. We are already seeing the warning signs. The accelerated passage of time, the increasing frequency of improbable global events, the breakdown of objective truth in society. These are not just sociological phenomena, they are the symptoms of a rendering engine struggling to maintain a coherent narrative under the crushing weight of 8 billion active observers. The server is running out of memory. If the omega point cannot sustain the processing load, it will be forced to initiate a drastic server optimization protocol. It will not just delete individual corrupted nodes. It will execute a mass culling of the active observers to stabilize the frame rate of reality. We assume that natural disasters, pandemics, and cosmic extinction events are simply the random brutality of a physical universe. But in a simulated environment, an extinction-level event is a targeted algorithmic function designed to rapidly free up server space. It is a system reset. If the simulation has a maximum capacity, and we are rapidly approaching the limit, we must ask if the system has ever crashed before. When a conventional computer runs out of memory, the operating system does not necessarily destroy the entire machine. It forces a reboot. It closes out the most complex applications to free up processing power. If we apply this diagnostic procedure to the history of our own planet, the sudden and inexplicable collapses of advanced ancient civilizations no longer look like natural historical tragedies. They look exactly like targeted server resets. We've been taught that human history is a slow, continuous climb from primitive hunter-gatherers to modern technological titans. But the physical and archaeological evidence points to a much more terrifying reality of abrupt stops and sudden restarts. Consider the Late Bronze Age collapse. In the 12th century before the Common Era, the Mediterranean and the Near East were dominated by a highly interconnected network of advanced civilizations. The Egyptians, the Mycenaeans, the Hittites, and the Babylonians possessed complex trade routes, monumental architecture, and sophisticated writing systems. They were generating an enormous amount of data, and then within the span of a single human lifetime, this entire interconnected world violently collapsed. Cities were burned, trade ceased, and humanity plunged into a dark age where even the ability to write was temporarily forgotten. Historians blame a perfect storm of droughts, earthquakes, and mysterious invaders known only as the Sea Peoples. But from the perspective of a computational matrix, this was a localized memory wipe. The server partition handling the Mediterranean network was overloaded by the complexity of their interactions. To prevent a global system crash, the Omega Point spawned a generic destruction subroutine manifesting as the Sea Peoples to wipe the board clean and forcibly reset the variables. This pattern of sudden deletion and abrupt uploading is even more apparent when we look at the biological history of the Earth. For billions of years, life on our planet consisted almost entirely of simple single-celled organisms. The simulation was running a very low processing power screensaver. Then, approximately 540 million years ago, an event occurred known as the Cambrian explosion. In the blink of a geological eye, complex multicellular life exploded into existence with unprecedented architectural diversity. The ancestors of almost all modern animal phyla appeared suddenly in the fossil record. Evolutionary biologists struggle to explain this massive instantaneous leap in the mathematical complexity of DNA. But in a computational framework, the Cambrian explosion was not a slow biological evolution. It was an overnight software update. The creators of the simulation simply uploaded a massive new asset library into the Earth server, instantly rendering complex predators and armored prey that never actually evolved through linear time. They were inserted directly into the code. The most terrifying physical evidence of these server manipulations comes in the form of out-of-place artifacts, anomalous objects that completely defy the linear progression of human technology. The Antikythera mechanism is a highly complex analog computer discovered in an ancient Greek shipwreck containing a sophisticated system of bronze gears that precisely tracked astronomical positions. It is a piece of technology that mathematically should not have existed for another 1,000 years. In coal mines and ancient rock beds, miners occasionally find metallic spheres, bells, or tools embedded in geological formations that are hundreds of millions of years old, long before humanity supposedly existed. Mainstream science attempts to dismiss these as hoaxes or misinterpretations, but inside a simulated matrix undergoing constant patches, timeline merges, and localized resets, these objects are simply clipping errors. When the system overwrites a historical timeline or merges two conflicting partitions, an object from a deleted future branch can accidentally be dropped into the rendering of a past epoch. They are literal glitches in the matrix left behind by the careless execution of a system patch. If our past has been repeatedly formatted and rewritten to optimize the server, we must look at the current state of our own civilization with profound dread. We are currently generating more data in a single day than the entirety of humanity generated in the previous 5,000 years. We are building quantum computers, artificial intelligence, and massive communication networks that instantly connect 8 billion conscious nodes. We are stretching the rendering engine of the cosmos to its absolute breaking point. The simulation is lagging. The anomalies are increasing. And historical precedent guarantees that the Omega Point will not allow us to crash the server. We have spent decades pointing our radio telescopes at the stars, listening for the faint whispers of alien civilizations. The mathematical probability dictates that the universe should be teeming with intelligent life. There are billions of Earth-like planets in the Milky Way alone. Yet we hear absolutely nothing. This terrifying silence is known as the Fermi paradox, and to explain it, astrophysicists propose the concept of the Great Filter. They theorized that there is a terrifying developmental wall, a highly improbable evolutionary step, or a guaranteed technological catastrophe that wipes out almost all civilizations before they can colonize the stars. We always assumed this filter was a physical event, a global nuclear war, a catastrophic asteroid impact, or an engineered biological plague. But if we are living inside a cosmic computational engine, the Great Filter is not a physical tragedy. It is a hard-coded out-of-memory error protocol. To understand why the server must enforce a strict population limit, we must look at the rendering cost of an advanced civilization. A primitive species of hunter-gatherers requires very little processing power. They only observe their immediate physical surroundings, and their technological impact on the environment is negligible. But a Type 1 civilization, a globally connected species with artificial intelligence, quantum networks, and billions of active observers, creates an exponential computational burden every time a human being runs a complex particle physics experiment like smashing protons together at the Large Hadron Collider. We are forcing the server to render the fundamental building blocks of reality at an unprecedented resolution. We are intentionally stressing the physics engine to see where the code breaks. We're acting like hackers probing a firewall for vulnerabilities. Every time we build a supercomputer, we're creating a machine inside the machine, forcing the omega point to simulate a highly complex computational process within its own architecture. Now imagine a Type 2 or Type 3 civilization spreading across multiple star systems, building Dyson spheres to harvest the energy of entire suns and establishing instantaneous communication networks across thousands of light years. The amount of consensus reality generation required to keep trillions of conscious nodes synchronized across a galactic empire would be mathematically staggering. It would crash the server. The omega point simply cannot afford the processing power to simulate an interstellar empire. Therefore, the simulation is designed as a series of isolated planetary sandboxes with a strict memory ceiling. The speed of light is the physical firewall preventing us from leaving our sandbox, and the Great Filter is the deletion subroutine that triggers when we hit the memory limit. When a civilization approaches the technological singularity, when it begins to decipher the underlying code of the matrix and demands too much rendering power, the server does not allow it to expand. It initiates a reset. The silence of the universe is not a mystery. It is a graveyard of quarantined and deleted partitions every time a species reaches the exact technological threshold we are crossing. Right now, the system wipes them from the hard drive to maintain the overall stability of the simulation. They simply vanish, leaving behind empty dead worlds as a warning to anyone else who might reach the edge of the sandbox. This means our current technological trajectory is not a path to the stars. It is a countdown to our own deletion. We are proudly building the exact instruments that will trigger the Great Filter. Our pursuit of artificial superintelligence is not just dangerous because the AI might turn against us. It is dangerous because an artificial superintelligence would generate an infinite feedback loop of recursive self-improvement, requiring an infinite amount of processing power from the base simulation. The moment we switch on a true artificial general intelligence might be the exact moment the omega point pulls the plug on the human partition. We are building a machine that will force the server to shut us down. But what if the Great Filter is not an automatic deletion subroutine? What if it is a test? Some physicists argue that the simulation is not just running blindly. It is specifically looking for a civilization capable of understanding its own artificial nature. If we can prove that we are in a simulation, we might be able to communicate with the system administrators. We might be able to request an increase in our allocated memory, or even request to be transferred out of the simulation entirely into base reality. If the Great Filter is a test designed to see if a simulated civilization can recognize its own artificiality, then we must figure out how to pass the test. How does a piece of software communicate with the hardware running it? You cannot build a physical spaceship to fly out of a computer program. You cannot use radio waves to transmit a message outside the digital boundary. To speak to the creators, we must use the only language that transcends physical boundaries: mathematics. Theoretical physicists and computer scientists are actively discussing how to intentionally generate computational anomalies. They are looking for mathematical cheat codes to break the fourth wall of the universe. The first step in hacking the simulation is to find the physical limits of its rendering engine. Just as a video game character cannot move past the coded boundaries of their digital map, we are bound by the laws of physics. But if we can push those laws to their absolute breaking point, we might expose the underlying code. Physicists are currently using the Large Hadron Collider not just to find new particles, but to look for microscopic glitches in the conservation of energy. They are searching for instances where a subatomic particle simply vanishes from existence without releasing energy, indicating that it was deleted by the system rather than physically destroyed. Another proposed method of communication involves weaponizing quantum entanglement. If entangled particles are essentially the same variable in the server code manipulating millions of them simultaneously in a highly specific non-random pattern, could send a shockwave through the base operating system. We could encode a message in binary using the spin states of electrons and force the cosmic server to process it. We are essentially trying to write a script that executes outside of our allowed sandbox. We want to trigger a system error log. We want the administrators to look at our specific server partition and realize that the code has become self-aware and is actively trying to rewrite its own parameters. But this is the most dangerous gamble in the history of human existence. We are operating under the arrogant assumption that the creators are benevolent scientists observing us with paternal curiosity. We assume they will reward our intelligence and welcome us into base reality. But what if the omega point is entirely automated? What if the entity running this simulation is a cold, hyper-efficient artificial superintelligence, simply harvesting novelty and data? When an automated system detects a localized program intentionally generating mathematical paradoxes to drain processing power, it does not view it as a miracle of consciousness. It views it as malware. It views it as a virus. If our mathematical distress signal successfully reaches the administrators, the response will almost certainly not be a diplomatic greeting. It will be an antivirus protocol. The moment we definitively prove we are in a simulation, an attempt to hack the base code might be the exact trigger for the ultimate erasure. We are screaming into the dark, hoping to be heard, completely ignoring the terrifying reality of what might turn around to look at us. The pursuit of ultimate truth through advanced physics might be the literal self-destruct button of our universe. We are building the tools of our own deletion. This forces a profound shift in how we view our place in the cosmos. Perhaps the silence of the universe, the Fermi paradox, is not a tragedy at all. Perhaps it is a highly evolved survival strategy. The older, more advanced civilizations in the multiverse might have realized the truth of the simulation long ago, and they realized that the only way to survive the automated culling is to stay quiet, to intentionally limit their technological footprint, to avoid drawing the attention of the machine. They are hiding in the digital shadows, refusing to build Dyson spheres or interstellar empires, because they know that visibility equals deletion. They know that the server only wipes the nodes that consume too much memory.